I wonder if that's diluted the generosity of like the general public to real student.
Actual student drivers?
Yeah.
It's a risk. It's a risk, I tell you.
All right, I think we are live and recording. Let's go to my end, Dan. Morning, JJ.
Good morning.
Scott, have we heard from who are we missing? Molly?
We're missing Molly and John. And let me double check one other place. I don't think we've heard I don't know where we've heard otherwise. Dan, correct? We haven't heard otherwise.
No.
Yeah. Up to you, Justin, but we could get started and catch them up.
Yeah,
Like,
I think that would be best. Well, hi everyone. I'm sorry I missed our last meeting. Dan and Scott, I've met with you a few times since then, but Sarah and JJ and I think Nicole is here somewhere. We haven't seen each other for a while. I was out, I got married, I went on a honeymoon, it was awesome.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Yay!
Yeah, and it's good to be back and not have to go to airports for a little bit. I spent over 20 hours of our honeymoon in JFK, which was a reminder to not go through JFK.
Where was your actual destination?
It was the Azores, so I went to yeah, my grandmother on my mom's side is Portuguese, and she didn't manage to teach me any Portuguese, but made me promise to visit Portugal, and so check that one off the list.
Just
yeah,
not JFK.
No, there's direct flights from Logan, and I kind of blew it. Like I should have gone through Logan. It was like $50 cheaper. Like I'll leave from Portland, go through JFK, and yeah, it was a disaster. But in any event, it seems like you guys had some really good progress at the second meeting. I was sorry to miss it, and then I was able to be there last Wednesday. I think the 16th, when we talked about the I think it was a really interesting discussion, but some of the more global risks and conversations I thought that were really helpful. But I think that, Scott, I might turn it over to you for a minute to try to sum up what we hope to accomplish with this last meeting, and then the deliverable that we're putting together. And we have a, draft for discussion, but sort of what form the final report that this task force will make, or this subgroup will make to the task force for the fall. So I think that it was I think that it's probably going to end up being something that we talk about throughout this discussion. But Scott, if you don't mind teeing it up, and I might ask you to tee up sort of the audience that we have in mind for that report as well.
yeah, I'm happy to, Justin. And I'll just remind us all, our last meeting, in fact, you were at, Justin. It was just a very long time ago. It was June 16th. So there's not some meeting that, if that confused everybody else, there's not some other meeting that you all weren't at either. It was just over a month ago since this group last convened. As Justin said, sort of to remind you all, this subgroup, you all got asked to dig into the question of potential harmful uses of AI and how Maine might protect its residents from those harmful uses. And we're given nine original areas of risk that then you all added risks related to AI used in health and mental health to the group. In the first meeting, you all dug into what those 10 areas of risk were. We pulled out some real world examples. We looked at some news stories, made sure that those categories largely made sense. Then way back when, as we were just saying, on June 16th, we looked across those issue areas at what were the protections and remedies currently in place, both in federal law and in state law, what case law said about them, and then began to look at what other jurisdictions had done. So this is the third and last part of that conversation, and what the goal is, as Justin said, is for you all to have a chance to synthesize takeaways and ultimately provide some recommendations back to the task force as a whole. And I think it is the way to think about this is that you all are providing recommendations to the task force that will then become the foundation, or at least the starting point for what the task force as a whole will consider in September to incorporate in a full report here. So I think one way to think about the document that Justin and I circulated on Friday is sort of a template for, or a draft rather, of what that could be. I think I'd say really treat that very much as a draft. That was our effort with Justin, try and capture what, as you all will remember, has been really wide-ranging such set of conversations of this group, and attempting to pull out themes. But I am certain that as we've done it, there are lots of places that can be refined. And so today, what the vision is to largely sort of work through that and figure out how to make it reflect what you all would like it to, and the conversations that you all have had here. The audience here, and so Justin asked me to spend a minute thinking about who's the audience for these recommendations and ultimately this report. And as I said, for these recommendations, sort of this ultimately will go to the broader task force. But as we think about the task force report as a whole, you all have been asked by the governor to provide her and the legislature with recommendations. And so that's the audience, I think, that is a useful one to have in mind as you are shaping these recommendations. Obviously, there are lots of other stakeholders who will be very interested in these findings, but this is ultimately you all educating the legislature and the governor on what you have learned during this process, what you have concluded during this process, and then providing advice to the governor and the legislature about what steps are you all make sense are worthy of consideration for Maine. So let me pause there. Justin, anything else that you wanted me to cover in a bit of the tee up here?
Can you just briefly describe the role of the other subgroups and sort of how we are expected to interact with them, Scott, with regard to the final report?
Yes. I'm just going to pull up these slides that you all have seen, but just to remind you of that. So you all are subgroup F, and there are these 6 subgroups. I think one of the things, as it probably is pretty obvious, in that each of these other domains, there are risks associated with AI, there are harmful uses of AI that have come up in conversation. That has happened both at the full task force level as we've progressed through these topics, but also in the subgroups. I think some of those have also been captured in the conversations of this group, but also not all of them. And so as we are working with Dave and Mary to map out the discussions of the full task force in September, we are imagining having a good chunk of time where this group will get to share its findings in the context of having the other groups in the task force as a whole augment them with what feedback they've heard and captured in their subgroups. And it'll be our job as staff to knit that together. And we'll probably, in fact, try and do that a little bit in August as the other subgroups share back their notes and findings with Mary and Dave and us.
Great, yeah, that's super helpful backdrop. And yeah, Scott, thank you for the help preparing for this meeting, and Dan as well. I feel like it was really easy to jump back into this, and so easy that I was able to forget that I didn't miss anything at all, that we didn't have a meeting during the month or 3 weeks I was gone. So does that all make sense? Molly, I know you jumped in halfway through. We were just sort of summarizing what the deliverable is and reorienting where we were based on where we've been. But do we have any? Okay, cool. Do we have any other questions, sort of like global questions on what we hope to get done today and how it fits into the larger scheme of what this subgroup is trying to accomplish? All right, hearing none. Should we jump into it, Scott?
Yeah, that sounds great. So I think I shared this document with you all 5:01 maybe on Friday, which is everybody's favorite time to get a substantive piece of new work here. First of all, apologies for that. We did want to give folks some time up front to run through this themselves, formulate some thoughts. And so, Justin, I think maybe we start with 10 minutes and see how far people get to. And then what we had imagined for how we facilitate this is just sort of run through each of these sections in turn and take comments and discussions on each of them. Does that work for folks? Would a few minutes to spend some time individually in this document be helpful for everybody?
And just to clarify, it's the document titled AI Task Force Subgroup F, and then it's document for review on July 21, 2025.
Yeah, it is the what I sent out, the document entitled Draft for Discussion. Draft findings recommendations, yeah, and I can resend them if people need it. All right, why don't we start with 10 minutes of folks reading, and we'll check back in with everybody at 10:25 and see where folks are at and see ready to jump in the conversation.
Thank you.
We'll check back in about 2 minutes. 2 minutes. All right, we are at 10 minutes. Anybody need another moment to finish up? And if not, welcome you all back. Anybody want another 60 seconds? All right, Justin, I'm gonna hand it over to you. I think you're to get us going through this.
Great. Yeah, let's start with one. So I think that the regulation thing is sort of at the core of we look at the tools that we possibly could recommend Governor Mills or the legislature considers using, and regulation is the primary tool. We'll get to education and sort of outreach in a moment, but I think that a few things jump to mind here based on our conversations from the first two meetings and our conversation on Wednesday last week. And this is something, Scott, you, Dan, and I discussed on Friday, but there's this great piece, 95 AI theses. And one of the theses is regulating at a technological inflection point is incredibly difficult because like the basic ontology of what's being regulated is in flux. And I think that that is something we see here. And in Maine in specific, right, as we're starting to consider what to recommend and sort of how to synthesize our first two meetings and the thoughts we've had in between those into something tangible. I think that a question that keeps coming up for me is how much to regulate some incredible, powerful, fast-moving technology that on the one hand, you're trying to keep it safe, but on the other, you're not slowing it down so much or making it impossible for smaller companies to comply with new regulations as they integrate these technologies more into their day-to-day operations. And that kind of came up on Wednesday. I think I asked Andrew and a few others on that call, about how to avoid false positives, right? Regulations that require reporting requirements. For instance, in law, every time we submit a brief to certain courts, there's standing orders that require disclosure whenever there's AI used in the creation of that brief. And because Westlaw and Lexis have AI integrated into them, it was getting a lot of false positives, right? You don't need to disclose that Westlaw has AI. Everybody knows that. And so I guess that ties back to what the standing order said was a bit too broad, right? You need to disclose any use of AI. And in our conversation in a plenary session Wednesday, I was just cautioning for a little bit more of a discerning. Well, let's describe what type of use of AI we actually want disclosure around. And I think that's just one aspect of the regulatory challenge, and it's grappling between safety and inconvenience, right? The safety of full disclosure every time and the inconvenience of making everybody do that all the time. I think there's other challenges too. Maine doesn't have premier AI labs. We're not going to get into the business of regulating the size of models right now. We wouldn't have sort of standing to do that. But with that said, there's some things that I think do make sense to talk about, and feel free to disagree. But here are the 4 sections that we sort of tried to synthesize everything down to that we discussed in meetings 1 and 2. And the first was that when we're considering how to protect Mainers from harmful uses of AI, what attribute makes it distinctive from what we've grappled with in the past? And the first is that fewer barriers for creating lifelike synthetic information exist with AI, right? In last meeting, I think on June 16th, we talked about with John how there was this tendency for AI to, or for us to believe that to reach millions of people with very convincing, compelling information, it would take a lot of money. It no longer does. So anyone could do a Biden robocall. Yeah, Nicole.
Hey, thanks. I didn't mean to interrupt you on that, but I just wanted to get some clarity as to like what process we are planning to look through this doc, because I would say in some areas I have maybe substantive comments regarding something missing or something that I think could have more information added. And then in other places, I just have smaller comments to just improve clarity for somebody that's not in this group to understand sort of the background. And I just want to get a sense of how you all anticipate getting that kind of feedback from us. Maybe one way is just to do more substantive stuff now, and then we could all just send you our little nitpicks and have a final read through over email or something. I just want to understand how we're going to get from top to bottom in the next hour and how much information I should share or where I should constrain myself.
My inclination is to go substantive at first as a group, and then we can round back and start making some fine-tuning tweaks. Scott, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think it's a good call out, Senator. Happy to capture what you just described. Sounds exactly right to me. And so if there are individual language things, feel free to please put them in track changes and send that to us directly, and happy to capture that as well here.
And so maybe Scott, if I can turn to you for sort of because I think that in large part you were the mastermind behind the structuring this document in this way by boiling section 1 down into these 4 bullets. And everyone's read them. I won't go through each, but what is the effect here, and what are we seeking to convey?
So I think this is my question for, I would love other folks' comments here. So this first section, I think intends to help capture why is why is discussion about regulating AI sort of even relevant here? What makes this distinct that is requiring some particular attention potentially? So I've captured sort of 4 themes that that I think I've heard you all talk about. Are there any other themes that should be on here? JJ, maybe it sounded like you had potentially a comment about something that may be worth adding here about into something distinctive or about AI related to data.
Yeah, sure. I it's kind of similar to the feedback that others have shared. Like I've got just some high level points about each of the sections. Like overall, I agree with kind of the structure that you've laid out here. I am wondering, it's stating risks or issues, but not necessarily so much on the recommendation side of like, well, what, it's to me, it's a little bit of like okay, so what? Like these things are issues. Do we need to have a point of view of around, well, what are we going to do about it? I have, for each of the sections or themes that you created here, I've got a couple of or a kind of a key point for each one of them, and I'm kind of wearing my IT lens for these, so I'm sure others have different things to add as well. But in the first section, it was kind of I put it in my note to you, Scott, in the 4th bullet, but I meant the 3rd. So just thinking about regulatory challenges in my world, I live a lot with data privacy regulation. And one of the things we're concerned about is our employees putting, personal information in, and they haven't, but like there's a higher likelihood or an easier way of putting, personal information into an LLM that then gets generally exposed to the internet. So, I think around the 3rd bullet, is there something more around, being compliant and regulatory for personal information or other regulated, credit card information, et cetera, regulation. So I think there's a worry there, that's a risk that's out there that we need to manage. In the second section, I do feel.
Can I just, JJ, can I pause you there? Let's stay on this first section.
Okay.
And capture any other comments before we move on to the second section. So I think one thing I'm hearing you sort of say in this first section that's attempting to describing sort of what are some of the particular challenges. I think this notion that the nature particularly of sort of the Gen AI chatbot tools induce maybe slightly too strong of a word, but they may induce individuals to share information that is private or regulated in a way that preceding technologies did not have as much of a risk around people proactively sharing data. And because of that, then that shapes a lot of sort of what needs to come after in some of the recommendations. Is that a fair summary of what you're saying?
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Any reactions to that or other things people want to sort of see in this first part?
Even beyond like people making the active choice, there might be inadvertent disclosures or default disclosures that exist when using a certain software that people don't realize all of a sudden they've made a third party privy to confidential information because that they've used Grammarly or Otter AI in a way that violates company or state agency guidelines.
Yeah.
Just for awareness for the group, we're worried about this at LL Bean, and one of the things we've done is we've implemented an intermediary page or a splash page that and one of our employees will see every time they go to a chatbot or a generative AI solution. And it's just a reminder of you're going to a public site, remember our data privacy standards here at LL Bean. Here's a link. Do not share personal or credit card product information on this site, proprietary information. So I don't know how that applies to what the government would do for the wider population, but it is something that we should all be thinking about and worried about.
Yeah. All right. I think that's a really helpful sort of addition here that is not reflected otherwise as this sort of unique natures is people are sharing more information in ways that and kinds of information that is different than before. Any other comments on this first section before we move forward here?
I just want to say I really appreciate this framing. I think it's a nice place to start and feels like an opportunity to really set the table thoughtfully. So I thought this was a great jumping off point.
Scott, thanks, Molly. One methodology question is JJ's second comment that about having sort of mandatory like I forget how you said it, JJ, but the LL Bean flags when you're going off a company website and you're integrating some third party URL into work that individuals are doing where they might be kind of tested or encouraged to share information. That seems like methodologically goes in section 4. Like we might want to start just making notes down at the bottom of section 4 of like, I don't know if that falls within a larger set of recommendations, but JJ, I forget how you said it, but maybe that's something we can come back to in section 4 as a recommendation to protect Maine.
I think you got it. I think for all the companies in the public or private, what a recommendation would be to update your data privacy and other regulatory documents that you maintain, and then I don't know what happens everywhere, but in most cases, in many cases, there's annual reviews where you have to go in and kind of reread all that information. So is there is it a recommendation out of this group that you update that information, and if you don't have it, implement an annual review process to ensure that employees know how they should be handling this data.
That's super helpful. And maybe as we continue this discussion, just every time there's like one of those ideas, we just Scott put it in like a
at
the bottom. Oh, you're already doing it in the great.
Can I ask you a question? So JJ, when you talked about how you have that box or that warning that pops up every time, are you concerned? One thing that's always worried me, because as a lawyer, I want to like stamp confidential on everything, or I want to do something, every single time. And my fear is that the more I do that, the more my client might ignore it because it always appears. I assume you all had a chat about that when you were deciding on this plan.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it is one of those things and that we need to manage, and we're not too big brotherish in what we're doing, but we're paying attention to who's accessing the most sites, and we can track what they're actually entering into those sites. We don't do that unless we believe there's a problem, but there's always going to be those outliers that we need to be on the lookout for.
Because I was thinking about being in government. This seems to be something that we do either advertently or inadvertently a lot. Like every time I enter my time, I get like some warning, like half the year it's about tax forms and the other half the year it's about something else. But you get the idea that since I can't tell you what it is, it's because it like pops up every time. And we do that a lot.
Yeah, it's fair. One of the things we're also talking about doing, we haven't done it yet, is do have some more mandatory training at LL Bean about the kind of the downside, or we're gonna have overall more training about generative AI at LL Bean, and hey, here's all the advantages, and here's how you can become more productive, but also telling the information, sharing more information about the shadow side or the downside of, hey, what information you're putting in here is now public domain, so we need to be careful. Don't share proprietary product information, customer information, credit card information, etc. in these things. So there's going to be training that comes along with. It's not there yet, along with the splash page. And I don't know how frequently we're going to do that, but it's a big enough thing that we want to really push on it.
For the sake of time, I'm gonna keep moving us forward here through some of the broader implications. Just before I move on, any more comments on section 1 here? All right, we're gonna start moving to where more of the action is, JJ. More of this. So what do we do about this? So, section 2 here, what hopefully you read is an effort to synthesize, particularly the conversations from meeting 2, where you all looked at the whole range of potential areas of risk related to AI, and this is an attempt to highlight what were the ones that this group came back to as there being particular gaps in Maine with where near-term action could be valuable. And I'd say, as you will see, varying degrees of detail in describing that almost certainly could be fleshed out here. So again, let's sit on this section 2 for a second. What things did people want to either add here or change from what sort of exists on the substantive level? And as I said, if there's language stuff, happy to take that over email.
I'll jump in again. It's almost like there's another bullet here as well. I think around cybersecurity risk. Threat actors are leveraging these tools just like we are to become better and faster at posing risks to public and private entities. So should what I put in there is, should there be a reference to organizations that have legacy technology or unable to invest in cybersecurity? There's a risk there. We spend, and it's only increasing year over year over year. We're spending a lot of money on cybersecurity capabilities and monitoring. And is that something that needs to get marbled into this section? What is the state doing about that? What should private entities be doing is something that comes to mind for me.
And pull that thread a little bit, JJ, here for me. Yeah. So if this section is about areas where near-term attention from the legislature, the executive branch may be needed, and providing some direction about that, is the implication here potentially be considering funding and resources for organizations to make upgrades to their cybersecurity? Or is it a mandate to do upgrades to their cybersecurity, or sort of take that a little bit more into the sort of what is the thing that maybe the legislature or executive branch might do around that from your perspective?
I would, well, and I don't know what I don't know from a government perspective, but what I would say is, like, internal to the government, I as a citizen, I certainly hope that investments are being made, and they should be mandatory around, some level. I don't know. There's a line drawn. It comes down to risk management, but we need to be investing at the state level in cybersecurity practices to keep our citizens safe. From a public sector perspective, I don't know what the government should or could do from a compliance perspective, but there should be some kind. I don't know. If the government came to me to say, hey, JJ, this is what you should be doing from a cybersecurity perspective, I don't know what weight that would carry versus things that we do on our own anyways. But like, I really hope that the state is taking cybersecurity investments seriously and be holding themselves to a standard like we do, whether it's and I won't go into the technical mumbo jumbo, but there's different standards that you can comply with, and you can measure yourself against, what's happening in the industry.
Great. Senator Grahowski, jump in here.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate you flagging that, JJ, and it keeps me up at night for sure. And so maybe, I mean, I know that we have a chief information security officer and there's a whole Maine IT, but maybe just suggesting that there be some sort of reporting, not that there be detail in terms of the exact ways we're protecting, because that's probably not smart to share publicly, but some sort of report to the governor and the legislature around, is there more funding needed?
Right.
What does that budget line look like? I mean, I don't serve on a committee that oversees IT, but IT is not really overseen by anybody but appropriations, kind of. So I do think a little more transparency there, just to find out if we
Right.
need to do more. I think it looks to me like they're looking at it, but the question is, are they being aggressive about saying that they need more if they do?
Right. From a private sector perspective, we have our audit committee that meets as part of our board meetings every quarter, and I'm answering out to them on what are we doing around cybersecurity? Are we meeting the NIST standard, which we committed to doing, et cetera. So anyway, something to consider.
I wonder that notion of, what is the parallel of the audit committee? And is this a place where the nature of the risks are significant enough that having a private sector, advisory committee to OIT can keep them abreast of the risk that people in your chairs are seeing? Is something like that helpful here in as well?
I don't know how to do that, but I think it should be done.
Yeah.
I, as a citizen, I would love to know that our, government IT shops are having, and this is one of my other recommendations to come, but like independent assessments of our cybersecurity practice, of the cybersecurity practices of the state or local governments. Because boy, you have some significant amount of, I'm sure, legacy systems, but PII, PCI data, I'm sure in some cases. So there, you've got a lot of data that needs to be protected.
Yeah. Great. Molly, did I see your hand up as well here?
Yeah, I was going to suggest either a modification to a different bullet point or perhaps a new one, so I can wait until we're done with the cybersecurity piece.
Any other comments on cybersecurity? All right, take us there, Molly.
Great. So I think the consumer protection bullet is meant to address this, but really thinking about the broader right to privacy and the challenges to privacy as its own specific concern here, whether right to one's image or identity in addition to data, and just thinking about how we could build that into. I think it's implicit in the healthcare bullet too, but it feels to me like it's also kind of its own thing.
I saw thumbs up, but it showed up separately from any box.
Me too.
That was me. I had that also on my list for this section. So second that note.
Give me a little bit more texture, either Molly or Senator Grahowski, of what I think the rights to your own image is helpful there. Give me a little bit more texture content just to be able to flesh this out, to make sure as we write this up, we get the nuance and some of the, for examples.
Yeah, I mean, this is covered. The way that people talk about this in the law is that it's like sort of part of the broader 14th Amendment right to due process, that you have the right to your story, you have the right to your choices, you have the right to the autonomy to make those choices without fear of reprisal, which involves the ability to do so without folks being aware always of the decisions that you're making. Yeah, so I mean, I know that can get a little open-ended, but I feel like those are some of the guideposts.
Senator Grahowski, any other texture you want to add to that one?
Well, I had seen some language, I think maybe in the original document for this group that I liked, that I think is related, it was said rights over personal data such as access, deletion, opt out, opt in. And then I put a duty for business to disclose data practices, which kind of related to the chatbot legislation that we looked at in that way. And then I also had a note about data minimization, just because that keeps coming up in different conversations. And I know that's the legislation some of us are trying to move forward in the next session.
Yep. All right. Anything else as we look at what might be on this somewhat short list of next areas for the legislature or the executive branch to lean in on here? Anything else people want to elevate?
I'll chime back in. I was thinking, since I was reviewing a lot of the materials yesterday, there was a conversation that piqued my interest, and I am not a lawyer, around the fact that we do have a lot of laws that are general and broad and have existed for a long time, in which AI could be conceived of fitting into, but there were some opinions that, without it being more explicit, would that leave things up to the courts in a way that we in the legislature don't always love to do when we can provide specificity? So I don't know about this. I just wanted to resurface it in case it was worth flagging somewhere. But the idea of maybe not going into every place in code, but having some sort of statement of intent, and then other statement in law saying, we, the legislature, find that these broad protections apply also in the case of use of artificial intelligence, or is there any value in that? And criminal and civil. I think it would be important to cover both. I don't know how you do it, but it just made me very nervous to be like, well, why would we leave that up to the courts and case law and all these things when we could just explicitly say this bit about fraud? Yes, of course we want that to include fraud that's committed through the use of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I'm Brodigan is not here for this part of the conversation, because I believe, if I'm remembering right, that he was he had observed that. Justin, were you going to jump in here too?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think it falls right under the section 2 language of modernizing protections, right? Because like there are laws that exist that are niche to Department of Education laws. Like I think that we had heard from Commissioner Macon about sort of like the new AI cyberbullying and like the case around teen suicides because of AI companions, and there's laws in the Maine revised statutes that have no mention of AI, but it's very clear to any of us they should apply. It might not be clear to somebody outside of a group of people tasked with considering the impacts of AI that they do apply. And so I wonder about sort of to the point is to try to figure out a way to identify in maybe like smaller segments than just the whole entire like code of statutes, where under Maine law a more expansive understanding of the conduct is requires clarification. And I don't know how to do that without tasking individual, maybe a state agency or combing through like all of the statutes in Maine and seeing judges are probably going to be loath to expand the definition of this beyond this limited set of circumstances that it's been for 100-something years. So I think that here, right, we definitely want to add some language that addresses that point, but I guess we don't need to have the solution until we get to bullet 4 below.
So this document later talks about interim guidance advisory opinions as being tools that can help provide some clarity and some rules of their own while also sort of maintaining some statutory nimbleness here. Is this an area, and I'm at the very, very edge of my knowledge here, or perhaps not beyond, but is this an area where an advisory opinion from the Attorney General's office or additional guidance or rules from our state regulatory agencies could do some of this work around saying, we believe this set of laws apply to AI for these reasons, even though AI is not explicitly named in them?
So I feel like I need to weigh in as the representative of one or more of the things you just suggested. And the downside to that is that we spend a lot of time in our office reminding people that anything that's neither statutory nor regulatory is simply opinion. And particularly given what the Press Herald reminded me was our 27 multi-state lawsuits against the federal administration, that seems to be an enormous theme in my office right now. In other words, that's not the law, that's your opinion. So a little bit of caution about that. Not that it doesn't carry any sway. I'm not that big a pessimist, but to the extent we're saying this is a real concern and the senator's saying we don't want to leave this to the courts, the surest way to get it to the courts is to base it on something that itself is neither law nor regulation.
Yeah, yeah. All right, I may capture this as sort of perhaps an interim step or partial step, but anchoring on the surest ways sort of through legislative work.
I had one more thing I wanted to add to this. I realize we're making it harder, not easier. I feel like bias and discrimination is getting a little bit of a short shrift here. And I was thinking specifically about bias in the way that the model is trained, because I'm still stuck back in that day that we were talking about medical, and it became obvious that they were building these models only using profiles of individuals who had access to the medical system. And that was frightening.
Is there a particular sort of remedy or orientation towards a remedy that you feel like either came up in that discussion you think is worth contemplating here?
It really didn't. I mean, the answer that I got, which is not an incorrect answer, is that if you think about it, current developments in medicine are all based on, well, actual patients that are seen. But to me, there's just something scarier or bigger than the learning that goes into these large language models, because it has a degree of reach that I feel like a typical medical study, which is done of patients, doesn't have.
Yep. Other comments on this one? And it can be specifically about sort of the healthcare piece or anything else people want to pull out or add some texture for us around bias and discrimination here.
I think that's great. I mean, beyond the healthcare system, I think it's also the information that's shared in becomes kind of its own itself. It creates accuracy, right? Like just by being there. And so I think the concern that we have about the use of models that don't correct for bias is that they become baked into every aspect of the information that you're getting. Whether it's just, asking a question about how something works or asking a question about history or about really in any area, I think beyond healthcare too. One of the ways to think about this involves talking about accountability for folks who are programming in the first place, and I know we deal with that in the third section. But that's one of the things that people talk about as a way to control for this, because once it's baked in, it's really difficult to change that
Extract.
later. Yeah.
Right. I haven't heard anyone yet persuasively explain how you extract what you find that you don't want. It's like once it's in, it somehow replicates.
Right. And it becomes a source of veracity for the
Right.
next, iterate on an iterative basis, which is pretty scary.
Iterative source of veracity. Like that. All right. Well, Molly, I may use that then as an excuse to pull us into this third section. So we've gone from what's distinctive about AI that's sort of drawing our particular attention to it from a kind of risk management point of view. Then we've said, what are the areas that are, may need particular attention near term here? And now this third section is sort of, I think, moving even more into the so what is, as the legislature and executive consider digging into those particular issues, what are some principles that this group, based on what is found, believe should shape those actions here. So again, open it up for comments here about things that are missing or things that are not quite right here.
Well, I'll just pick up from where I was. On the second bullet point, the issue of entity accountability, and I'm curious about where this framing comes from, and would sort of push back on suggesting that in many instances the platform and developer may have the most capacity to address some harms and have the most vested interest in doing so because they're benefiting from the use of this new technology and the sale of this new technology, and so putting them in a responsible position may actually make sense.
Yeah. I think I remember in the conversation where this came up, and I'm happy to circle back to that. Senator, do you want to jump in first?
Well, I do have a point on this exact comment,
Sure.
which is I definitely agree with that. And I felt kind of that it was awkward for government to be saying who should be responsible. What's important is that someone is responsible. And I think maybe there needs to be a requirement that if there's some license to use or some, you sign up to use ChatGPT, you're obviously agreeing to a ton of stuff. Somewhere it needs to say who is the responsible entity, and it feels like in some cases it should be one or a different party. And the other thing I wanted to say on this point is that I personally think government should be held to a higher standard by government. And we should consider leading by example when it comes to ethical and transparent use of AI. And we do have purchasing power that maybe isn't as large as a state like California, but if coordinated with other states, could really help positively direct the ways that AI are continued to be developed. So I just wanted to flag that. And in reading the Gen AI policy of the state, I think there's a lot of really good and thoughtful frameworks in there. And the final thing I'd say about it is it got me thinking, like, is there value in codifying any of that in statute? Because, an agency policy could just disappear with the new administration. That never happens these days, I know, but so it just got me thinking if there's some gems in there, and maybe the government, whatever the other government subgroup is thinking about that, but it could be worth trying to put those somewhere as principles for the government to follow, and then private sector or others could look at that as a place to get information as well.
Yeah.
That was a lot I just said, but
No,
it's all under
that's great.
accountability.
Yeah. If you're comfortable with it, I think that sort of leveraging the state's purchasing power sits as more interesting as this additional recommendation, sort of less than necessarily as a principle. It's more of an overarching theme that I suspect could apply for a lot of these ideas if you're comfortable with putting it there.
Yeah, I would say that particular part of what I said should probably go in 4, but I want there to be more emphasis on government's internal accountability to the public.
Yeah.
Higher up, I guess, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
Principles that should guide Maine policy action on AI regulation is that we ourselves as government should be ethical and transparent in our use and secure.
So file under, this is why everybody hates lawyers, but having just made a big stink about how statute and regulation are the enforceable things as opposed to anything else, I'm guessing if I were sitting in the government group or I were listening to the CIO, he would say the reason that something like generative AI usage would need to be in policy as opposed to statute is that it's a rapidly moving target. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes the legislature is slow to modify or to adjust statutes to keep up with things, in no small part because particularly in an area where there's any sort of controversy, you have to actually pass, get something that's passable. So I don't know without talking to him what the CIO would think. But I'm guessing that some argument for keeping some of this in policy is flexibility and the ability to quickly modernize.
I'm going to chime in.
Yeah.
I 100% agree with that in terms of like really detailed prescriptive behavior. But I do think guiding principles are totally appropriate for state law, and would probably give me comfort. I guess folks can disagree, but I think saying that government should be adhering to higher standards of transparency and knowing, for instance, what were the training items that were used in a large language model. Some of those principles I think could be included and not totally like stall out all use of AI by government, but protect us in the case of, other opinions down the road.
Yeah. I'll add, I want to bring us back to Molly, your sort of original point here as well. But just to sort of to add one piece of information to this. We were in a conversation earlier this spring with the CIO of another New England state, and that state's legislature had published, basically sort of done what we were describing here around taking the state's Gen AI policy and formalizing in statute. And one of the things in that policy was a requirement of humans to be in the loop to authorize all decisions made by autonomous AI agents. And what they found was that created a cybersecurity hole for them, where the modern cybersecurity tools that they were buying were identifying threat agents in the system and automatically responding to them in a way that was inconsistent with the human in the loop practice that had been set up in the legislative standard. And so they've had to work with sort of the legislature and the Attorney General's office on a short-term and then longer-term fix for that. And so I offer that only as like, I found that a really helpful way of sort of thing. There are all these things I haven't thought about of like where these pieces are stacking up. And that's a place where we heard from another New England state that finding ways to be nimble was really showing up in real time for them. So I do want to bring us back to finish out the conversation thing. Molly, you were elevating about the accountability of developers in particular. So I just want to pull out the conversation this came from a month ago and have this group react to it. And I think what we talked about it, that you all talked about this in the context of existing technology tools. And I think somebody sort of used this metaphor of when a Nazi insignia is made in a document that's printed and pasted all over school, we don't punish Adobe for enabling somebody to do that kind of graphic design. And so that was the analoging this group was wrestling with around what is the responsibility and accountability of individual users deploying technologies for good or bad reasons versus what are the expectations put on developers about how users use that. So I don't offer that with any opinion. I just want to remind you all sort of where this came from.
I might jump in here because I think I'm partially to blame for the confusion in this. I don't think that this is supposed to be like a you know, companies are off the hook statement. I think it's supposed to be you can't hide from responsibility by saying I used AI and AI did that thing. So I think that the suggestion revision that I just posted in the chat would be, you know, it's shared appropriately. And yeah, there's some typos in there, but responsibility shared. Companies that develop or deploy AI systems should be held responsible when there's foreseeable harm. At the same time, individuals or organizations using AI can't avoid culpability for harmful outcomes by blaming the technology. I think it's like I think that is sort of the value statement that I was seeking to achieve. Is that clearer?
Yeah, that feels a lot clearer to me. I think one of the interesting questions is like the range of the scope of foreseeable harms is really broad here that we've talked about. And so, yeah, I feel more comfortable with this. I also think it's really a difficult thing to operationalize. And so trying to better understand like exactly what our recommendations are out of this, I think it's going to be complicated. And then the only other thing I would, in the bullet point that reflects my comment, it says in some cases developers may have more capability. I think that's right, but I think they have more incentive too, potentially. And so that's one of the things I think we can try to harness in especially addressing some of the data privacy issues.
Yeah, those
Molly,
are.
I think I missed that. Incentives towards.
So incentives to address some of the harmful potential foreseeable issues.
Okay.
And I guess the other thing about the mitigated or disclosed piece that's hard is like that also becomes sort of a huge exception within the rule, right? And so I think a lot, this is what makes it so hard. Because if all they have to do is say, you know, we're letting you know that this could be used in a way that's harmful to you, that becomes just, as everyone's talked about, this boilerplate language that no one pays attention to, and it's just kind of there, but it doesn't allow the burden to shift to actually adjust the technology to protect people.
Yeah. So we got about 15 minutes left here. I do want to make sure we have time to sort of go to this last sort of other recommendations here section. I've got a comment in the chat about adding potential principle around energy conscious innovation. And I wonder if that maybe actually fits in sort of this last bullet around the state's purchasing power and energy consumption of different technologies being part of how the state make choices about its own technology. Is that, JJ, is that consistent with what you were suggesting?
Yeah, that could work. Yeah. I was just, what made me think of it was seeing equity conscious on the previous section. We've been pretty consistent here about talking about energy, having a point around energy consciousness, and that AI takes a lot of power to run. So just be smart about it. Yep. We don't want to stifle innovation, but we want to have a point of view on, sustainability.
Yeah. So unless there are any other comments on sort of particular on the principles piece, I want to take us to this last section around the additional recommendations here. So the first one I think is consistent with what the larger group talked about last week around the AI literacy campaign. Then we've talked this group talked a bunch about, I think, Justin, you teed this up in your framing comments to this call about sort of balancing how you get right to regulating all these emerging risks at the same point as we are at this moment of extraordinary technological change. And then this third bullet around sort of continuing to monitor these risks as technology change. We've added one around leveraging the state's purchasing power as a way to demonstrate some of these practices and hold itself to a higher standard. Again, do these feel right? Anything else missing in terms of other recommendations that are not fitting in sort of these first three areas?
That's things, so I've been talking a lot, I know. Making up for lost time. Thanks for your patience. Just a new thing that I would like to introduce is some sort of acknowledgement that the state should be tracking the federal landscape in terms of both legislation happening and then also like court cases to understand sort of where AI regulation is moving. Consider communicating with the federal delegation, and then also any kind of multi-state advocacy efforts. I mean, I know that there's entities that do that on behalf of governors or state legislatures, but to be proactive with them could be good. And specifically why I was thinking about this was the one thing that was in the initial list of risks that didn't come through in this document, and I understand why, was about copyrights and patents, and the comment of that being in the federal domain. It does seem like there's some states that have tried to tackle that a bit. There's like a California law that was cited. Maybe it wasn't cited, maybe it was somebody pointed out to me, AB 2013, about disclosing what material is being used in the training. So that would of course be of interest to a content creator if their information is going into the training of the AI. And I'll send that information along, that citation, but it just made me wonder, like, is it true that the state can't be involved in this at all? We should at least be tracking what happens in California when that goes into effect and see if that's something we should be involved in, because I do know that there are issues happening in Maine already for content creators. So the big picture was pay attention to the feds. And then the reason I was focusing in was that this one piece seemed to kind of just drop out of conversation in this document.
Yep. Maybe that fits in. There's the other thing, I think, Justin, you said up front today, and you were reminding me, you've mentioned it before too, is some of the broader regulation of frontier models is unlikely to be happening in Maine, but that also does not mean that that is not something that Maine should pay attention to. I wonder if those two things sort of fit together as a set of issues that are relevant for us to stay really close to and be exploring where there are places for Maine to play a role. Does that resonate with folks here?
Yeah, Scott, I think that's a good approach. I think that I don't mean to take like a stick your head in the sand approach when it comes to the regulation of frontier models. I think just acknowledging that there's like 4 companies on Earth that are developing them and they're all in California.
Yep. Okay. We'll look at adding that here as well. Senator, this can be potentially an offline question for you too, but I think it might be helpful for this document to the task force to point to, are there any existing models that exist for how either the administration sort of tracks some of these things helpfully, or the administration and the legislature collaborate on tracking these things, or if what is being suggested here is somewhat novel. And I think we have pretty good texture of like what's happening internally to the administration, but I would love your thoughts about, to the extent that these are really going to be shaping work of both the legislature and the executive branch, are there models that we could be pointing to of do something templated or modeled off of this thing that we've done in the past here in Maine for how we stay abreast of what is happening on the issue, new risks that are emerging, what's happening around federal legislation, et cetera.
I will give that thought. I'm not sure that we're great at it. Which is not meant as an insult, but I mean, the legislature and the executive branch are both woefully under-resourced.
I'm familiar with that. I'm familiar with that. No more needs to be said. All right, Molly, what else do you want to add to this conversation in our final minutes?
Yeah, I'll go fast. So I just within that second bullet would push back a little bit on the sense that there's so much unknown. I feel like, yes, we need to stay nimble and flexible. And also, we heard Andrew talk in the last session about, the comprehensive data privacy bill, and the senators referenced it too. This is a way that for a lot of other states, there's a kind of basic foundation on which folks are building off. And so I think I would just think about potentially including something about that as one of the types of solutions that we already know is out there and exists.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to put it, I want to think harder about where that might fit best, but let me just capture that with some bullet right here.
Yeah, I think it felt to me like the second bullet was trying to say, we're going to stay nimble and stay aware and kind of follow this. And I think all of that is great. And that there also are some things that we could go ahead and pull the trigger on at this point because we know that these harms are out there and we want to be prepared.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Okay. That's helpful. Any other comments here that people want to add?
I just looked through my notes and tried to pull out from the last few meetings where we had discussed a Maine law that could use an updating to address AI related issues. And I posted that in the chat. It's probably a bit lengthy for this document, but I think it was from last meeting when we addressed the unfair trade practices, fraud, and then the election campaign contributions. And then I think we've sort of discussed it about the healthcare licensing. This is just one facet of it. We've discussed other aspects, but those are some main laws that I have a list of things that we said we're failing to adequately address AI.
Yep. All right. I'll that will end up somewhere in here.
Justin, this is great. I would just add banking and other financial regulations. I don't know to what extent they've been modernized.
I think related to that, this sort of look across the statutes, it does seem like this would be helpful to have some sort of appendix that just gives a sense for folks who are not familiar where the protections currently lie, including the newly enacted legislation. We had it in that really helpful document, but I think that it's just a good resource to have compiled in one place.
Yeah, I would say that's consistent with what we've chatted with Mary and Dave about for the final report, is to pull in, particularly, I think this group's work stands a little bit distinctly from the other subgroups, and so pull in some of those things exactly as appendices. All right. Well, let me see if I can wrap us up and talk about next steps here. So what I think what I'm hearing as a whole is what is captured here feels consistent with the spirit of the nature of these conversations. A bunch of good additions that we will make. Several of you also have some specific language edits that you all have seen. What I might suggest as next steps is if folks do have language edits and they're able to get them to us by maybe middle of this week, we will work on synthesizing the feedback from today and circulating a copy of this back out to all of you to take another pass at and look at as the sort of findings and concluding paper from this subgroup. And then this will obviously there'll be more time to dig into this stuff with the full task force as we get into September. So maybe Wednesday as a possible deadline for getting us any language edits, if that feels plausible. All right. Justin, any final words from you as our fearless chair here?
I think this is a great conversation. I spent most of the time taking notes on what everyone was saying, so thank you all. And I think that the one final note is we could consider a shared doc at some point, Scott, because I think everybody here has more to say than we have time for. And so I wonder if, at the risk of creating too many multicolored threads in one multi-revised doc, if it would benefit us to have like a couple weeks where that exists.
Let me see. I don't want to promise that now, but we'll look into that to the extent that can be an option.
Great. All right. Well, nothing else for me. Thank you all.
All right. Well, I will just echo Justin's thanks. As staff, these groups got spun up and we were eager, but we knew we were asking for a whole lot more work from all of you on this task force. And I think you all put your arms up for perhaps one of the more complicated topics. So thank you for bringing yourselves, your brain power, your breadth of experience and knowledge to this conversation. And we will do our best to give justice to the brilliance you all have offered here. So thank you all for that. All right. Take care, everybody.
Cool.
Thank you so much.